Hi everyone, welcome to the Sip and Spin. I have become enamored with aprons because they make incredible spinning accessories. Today on the Sip and Spin, I'm going to talk a little bit about constructing an apron that you can use to support either a spinning spoon or a spinning bowl. The apron that I'm wearing right now is from a vintage Simplicity pattern, and as you can see, the belt on it is supporting a spinning spoon, and it works perfectly for supporting the spoon in such a way. It's fluid a little bit, but it gives me exactly the support I need to spin effortlessly and to move around if I want to. Not that I would be cooking and spinning, although I probably could if I really wanted to. One of the other things that I like about aprons, if you don't have a spinning spoon and want to use a spinning bowl, you can as well. I will put my trusty spinning spoon back, and I will walk over to my magnetic board of accessories. I love magnets. I've just discovered magnets this year, and I think they are the best thing ever, and that's where I keep one of my spinning bowls. So this apron has pockets. Pretty much anything with pockets is magical. So I'm just going to take the magnet and slip it into my pocket and make sure it goes the right way so it doesn't repel the bowl. And it just latches on. And not that I would be walking around with it like this, but here's what I've discovered. I can now sit down, and this apron serves two purposes. One, it's going to protect my clothes. So if I'm spinning or if I'm working with raw wool, carding wool, this is going to catch all of the debris if I'm processing wool as well. And I now have a stable surface for my spinning bowl. One of the things that I've discovered when I'm out in public is sometimes it's hard to maneuver with the bowl and a support spindle. And some people say, well, that's when you would use a drop spindle. I'm going to have to be real honest. I am drawn much more to my support spindles lately than I am my drop spindles. And so I wanted a way that I could spin pretty much anywhere and have a bowl that is securely supported. So it's on my lap. It's not going anywhere. And I can spin. Like so. So at this point, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, I must have one of these. Well, guess what? Today, I am going to show you how you can make your own spinning apron with absolutely no fabric waste. Now, I started working on this in a little sewing shop in a little town outside of where I live because A, I needed to have my sewing machine fixed, and B, I needed a large cutting surface. So I'm going to jump over to there, and when I'm done cutting the fabric out and sort of explaining the process, I'm going to invite you to meet me back here where I'll talk a little bit about the construction and review what I did while I was at the sewing center. So very quickly, I was online looking at the history of aprons, and I wanted to know when aprons originally sort of became part of fashion, and in essence, they really are. What I discovered, apron is actually an English word that comes from a French word, French again, naperon. Naperon actually means small tablecloth or napkin. And in the 12th century, aprons were used by men for hygienic reasons, hygiene, and that hygiene protection keeping your clothes clean comes through over and over again throughout apron history. So as the years progress, in the 16th and 17th century, we start seeing colors pop in, and the colors denoted trades. So for instance, a barber might wear a checked apron. Butchers and porters would wear dark green aprons. And then as we move through time, the pinafore and the length increased to protect more of your clothing. And as I started thinking about that, it made a lot of sense. It's a lot easier to wash an apron than it is a full piece of clothing, especially women's clothing. Through the 18th century and into the 19th century, women's clothing was cumbersome and it was heavy, and to wash it took a lot of effort. Aprons would be a lot easier to keep clean. I discovered that in the 1930s, aprons got festive. This is where we start seeing crochet aprons, extravagant embellishments and colors. And then in the 1940s, with the war, they started to become a little bit more utilitarian, and sewing aprons became something to do for the war effort and something to do while practicing hand stitching. And that got me thinking about this project in particular. There are lots and lots of patterns out there on making aprons. And what I realized is, as I've cut out and I've made some of them, they're kind of wasteful in terms of fabric. And I was keeping in mind the idea of the 1940s and trying to use as much of the fabric as you could. So I came up with a recipe for an apron. And this particular recipe would be a great first project if you're in 4-H or if you're working on a Girl Scout badge. This would be a great place to start, and it would be functional. So here we go. To make your apron, you need to gather some supplies. You'll need two fabrics. You'll need a main fabric and a contrasting fabric. The main fabric, you'll need 1.5 yards. Your contrasting fabric, you'll only need 1/2 yard. While you don't need a T-square, T-squares are incredibly helpful for measuring, but a measuring tape will do just as well. Highly recommend a water-soluble marking pen, and you can get these at any fabric store. They're great because the marks come off when they get wet, and you need a good pair of sewing shears. And usually when you're sewing, you want a pair of scissors that is just for cutting fabric, because it's going to be sharp and you're going to get a clean cut. You could also use a rotary cutter, especially if you're using a quilting mat or a self-healing mat. I personally am not a fan of rotary cutters. I'm scared to death I'm going to take off a fingertip. So I kind of like scissors just as well. So here's the recipe for our apron. And the one I'm designing, I chose a main color and a contrasting color with a 4-H theme. And the reason why I did that is a good friend of mine is just starting a 4-H club, and I thought this would be a fun gift to give. And the nice thing with doing it this way, I will be able to get 2 aprons out of the 1.5 yards and the 1/2 yard fabric that I have. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is do a little bit of measuring. So for the main part of your apron, or the body of the apron, you're going to need one rectangle that is 21 inches long by 41 inches wide. And then you're going to need a second rectangle for the waistband that is 4 inches wide by 22 inches long. Then you'll need pockets. And for the pockets, you're going to want a relatively large square. So these are 9 by 11 squares. And then over the top of my apron, in the contrasting color, you're going to need one rectangle that is 14 inches long by 31 inches wide. You'll need 2 4-inch by 28-inch strips for ties, or you could use a fun ribbon. And if you're going to use ribbon, I would recommend 3-inch wide ribbon, because that's going to give you a stable bow. So once you get in and get started, you'll cut out your pieces. And then where the fold is, I would highly recommend ironing and washing your fabric before use. That way, if there's any shrinkage, it's going to happen before that first wash. Most cottons, quilting cottons, which is what this is, they don't shrink very much at all. So wash and iron your fabric before you get started. All right, welcome back. So a couple things. I spread the fabric out. One of the things that I forgot to mention, fabric comes in two widths. You're either going to find 45 inches or 60 inches. Most of the really fun printed cottons come in 45-inch widths, and that's what's enabling you to get 2 aprons out of each 1.5 yards and half-yard pieces of fabric. And one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, the reason why I like the formula that I put together where you're just using rectangles is because there's no waste. The one that I'm wearing, while adorable, and I actually really, really enjoy it, I ended up with all of these bits of fabric. And for someone who's trying to reduce waste, to me, this isn't the best way to construct garments. It's not the best way to construct a tool to be used when I'm making yarn. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. Another reason why the rectangles are kind of nice. And I do have a finished apron. So I talked a little bit about it, and I didn't have one at the time. Now I do. So this is the finished apron. And as you can see, here is the larger rectangle underneath with the smaller one on top with Zola's fur all over it, and the pocket with the nice little flap. It's kind of decorative there, and of course the ties. Now, if you want your ties to wrap around more so you can use with a spinning spoon, you're definitely going to need to make your ties longer, and you could certainly do that either by using ribbon, as I said before, or doubling up on these and making them twice as long. If you've got twice as much width, you'll have twice as much length. Stands to reason. I know, you're like, duh. And I'm not even drinking in this episode, so maybe I should break out a cocktail. All right, so what we have, how do we get started? The first thing that you're going to want to do is, and this is one of the reasons why it's such a great first project for a first-time sewer. The first thing that you're going to want to do is, using your iron, you're going to want to fold over about 1/4 inch, and there are tools for that. And you're going to want to iron it, and you're going to want to do that all the way around, and you're going to do it both with the big piece and with the small piece. So what I'm doing is I'm just folding over about 1/4 inch, and I just eyeball it, but if you want to be precise, actually I think this is probably closer to 1/2 inch. Yeah, it's about 1/2 inch right here. So you're going to want to fold over 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch on each side first. You want to do the sides first and then do the bottom. So I'm going to swing it around, do the same thing on this side. Fold over a very small amount. And yes, I can do a quick measure. Yeah, it's still about 1/2 inch. Now, if you want to be very precise, then you would fold it over again and pin it before sewing. I am not that precise because I've been sewing for a very, very long time. So usually all I do is fold it over again really quickly and then go to the sewing machine. All right, I have the machine set up for direct sewing. It's just going to be a straight stitch, and I will fold that over so I have a closed hem. And it's just shy of 1/2 inch. Okay, so we have our 2 rectangles hemmed on 3 sides. The next thing that we need to do is place and sew our pocket. So the first thing you need to decide is where you want your pocket. And because I like having the bowl a little bit lower, I placed the pocket lower. So I know that I am going to be putting it pretty much essentially down along this seam line. So in order to construct our pocket, all we're going to do is we're going to sew around all 4 corners, leaving a small section open at the bottom. And I've got a couple little tricks for this. So let's go ahead and sew this, and I'll show you a trick for pushing out those points so you get nice sharp corners. Here we go. And the reason why I'm going around each of the corners is because it's a lot easier to pin this down and sew it onto the apron if the corners are already sewn. So I know this is my starting point. I don't leave a whole lot of room. That's probably good. All right. So now trim my threads. I will need to, here's a quick trick. Trim your corners so they are flat. It gets rid of some of the excess fabric and will make your points a little bit sharper. And I also have what's called a bamboo point turner. I believe that's the proper term. Oh, I lost my opening. There it is. So I constructed my pocket by putting the right sides together and sewing roughly a 1/2 inch seam around all 4 sides, leaving an opening up at the top. I have a bamboo point turner that I am going to use just to push out my points, make sure I didn't miss anything, so I have a nice square pocket. And I have that nice seam there, so I'm going to iron this flat very quickly and then place it on my apron. Okay, so again, your formula that you use to construct your apron is entirely up to you. The dimensions that I gave, I said you roughly need 21 inches by 41 inches and then 16 inches by 31 inches. You could certainly make it longer or shorter. It all depends. If you're taller, you might want to add some. If you're shorter, take some away. Your pocket, you've also got some options. It can be larger or smaller. You can either keep it large like this, so it's an incredibly deep pocket, or you can fold it over for a nice lip. So what I'm going to do is pin this on, but before I do that, I'm going to make a couple marks. I'm just going to set that there. I need to know where the center of my apron is because that's going to determine where it goes on my waistband. So, and I want everything even. I don't want one side over here and one side over here. So I do want it to be even. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch that like so, and then open it up, and using my water-soluble marker, I'm going to make just a quick mark there. And then I'm going to do the same thing on my larger piece. I'm going to fold it neatly in half, pinch it there so I've got a little bit of a crease, and make a mark. Now I know where to line up both pieces when I go to gather them. So both pieces are lined up, and that's going to be important when I put this on my waistband. So I'm going to put my pocket right here. I want it on the right side. And because I'm not going to be sewing my top, that's actually where I'm going to be putting my pins. There are lots of ways to pin. I don't use pins very often unless I really need to keep something secure. They just get in the way when I sew. All right, so I have the pocket pinned to my apron. Just put one more right there to keep it stable. So I'm going to sew around these 3 edges, and you've got some choices. If you want your flap up, you can just sew around these 3, in which case your flap will flap up and down. It'll be a flappy flap. Or you can sew your flap down. Now, because mine extends over a little bit, I'm actually just going to sew around the inside, so my flap is going to be a flappy flap. I'll be right back. So I'm going to take and mark on the waistband as well where my center point is. Just right there. Okay, so a couple things before I put the finishing touches on. So just very quickly, here is my apron. Oh, I did not hem that evenly. Whoops, good thing it's going to be gathered. No one will know. Okay, so as you can see, looking at it this way, I have just a series of squares and rectangles. My pocket is attached. I've got 2 choices for my waistband. Waistbands can either be pleated, like I did with this one. And I made the mistake. I pleated this one backward. I actually put the tighter pleats over here, and I should have put the tighter pleats over here. Learning curve. So on this first one that I did, I attached the pocket all the way down, and I pleated the waistband. For this one, I left the pocket flap open, and I'm going to gather the waistband. Gathers are easier. However, they do require a couple additional steps. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to baste this top piece to the bottom piece so it doesn't move when I gather it. So I'm going to baste first, which just means I'm going to sew along the top edge so it's stable. Then I am going to take 2 lines of stitching across the top with very wide stitches, and I will gather those up to fit in the waistband. I'll be right back. All right, so I have gathered my skirt up. Now, I put the waistband down in front because I didn't want to go too far. I want to make sure I've got an even set of gathers all the way across. And I gathered from both ends. Because I'm going through two pieces of fabric, it's important that you have two sets of gathers in case one breaks. You've got your backup, which is very important. And when you're going through this much fabric, it's nice to meet in the middle. So I started pulling on one end and came in, and sure enough, there was one little hiccup right here. So I'm really glad that I was moving from both sides, because it kind of got hung up right there. I'm not sure if I crossed my threads or what I did, but it's a little sticky right there. So it was nice being able to go from the other side and pull in as well. So now I'm just going to even out my gathers, make sure that I don't have any spots, and I am ready to put this on my waistband. Now, what I like to do is tie off my ends so my gathers don't slip. And I will pin this, even though I'm not a huge fan of pins. I will pin this, so I need to find my center point, which, oh, look at that. It's right there, and there's the center. Oh, I love when things work out like that. So right sides together, again, I will be pinning my center points together, making sure I've got an even amount on each side. And I'm going to pin and sew this, and then I will flip it over and sew it to the other side. I am going to do something that I just realized what I did on the other one. Before I sew this on, I'm going to do a little bit of prep. I am going to iron down 1/4 of an inch on one side, and I'm going to iron 1/4 of an inch on the other side. Again, it's going to make it just a little bit easier to seam. So I will be right back with half of my waistband. I'll do one half, and then I'll do the other half. In the middle. And I did a couple things with the ironing board. I folded over 1/4 of an inch here. I also folded over 1/4 of an inch here. I went ahead and folded my waistband in half and ironed it, so I've got a nice seam. If you're ironing a lot of these pieces in, it just makes the garment construction a little bit easier. You're not fighting with fabric when you get to the sewing machine. All right. Up to this point, all of our sewing has been straight seams. Easy, very easy. Putting the waistband onto the actual apron, this is probably the trickiest sewing because you've got all of these gathers and stuff under here, and you don't want anything bunched up or pleated up. So what you're essentially doing is you want the apron to stay straight as you're sewing, and that's where it gets just a little bit tricky. I'm also using a very small seam on this one. And I don't want anything folded. So see, like right here, it's starting to fold over. I don't want that to happen. So move it over so it's straight. And there you have it. I simply used a safety pin and strung a piece of satin ribbon through essentially the casing that I made for the waistband, and I have a finished apron. It's a quick project. It's a great first project. Couple bonuses or benefits. If you're a weaver, you can weave the rectangles and create these. Zoom looms make great squares for the pockets. You could probably do this entire apron with zoom loom squares if you really wanted to. The benefits of wearing an apron while spinning or working with fiber, you've got a place to catch fiber. And if you're working with an expensive fiber, it's actually kind of nice to have it, if it's going to stick someplace, have it stick someplace that it's easy to get off of. That's the nice thing with cotton as well. It has a relatively good tooth to it, so if fiber does stick to it, it's very easy to roll off. The pockets are great if you're using a magnetic spinning bowl, which are pretty much my new favorite thing. If you've got a long enough tie, you can also use that for a support spinning spoon. I think aprons as an accessory to your spinning repertoire, something worth looking into. Thank you so much for checking in with me today. As always, nope, I'm not going to say it this way. I'm going to say it this way. Happy sewing. I look forward to hearing about your successes and/or trials or tribulations with this particular adventure. Thanks for checking in.